broadcast live to more than 12 million Americans, Jasmine Crockett confronted House Speaker Mike Johnson during a congressional hearing that quickly fell into disarray. Johnson mocked her, dismissing her as a televised performance with fake lashes and attitude, then walked out with a self-satisfied smirk. What he didn't realize was that Crockett had been recording the entire exchange and carried a 200-page file that would soon undermine his entire career. Within 48 hours, she filed a $100 million lawsuit that dominated national headlines. The courtroom turned into a legal battleground. His public standing collapsed. Her silence became the most discussed moment in the country. What was on that secret recording that pushed the Speaker of the House into hiding for nearly 2 months? Stay with us. This is a story worth your time. The marble floors of the Capitol reflected the overhead lights, but the environment was far from polished. Every seat on the House Budget Committee was taken. The press section, usually half full during routine fiscal hearings, buzzed with reporters, cameras, and producers whispering instructions through headsets. There was an unmistakable energy in the room. At exactly 10:04 a.m., the red recording light switched on. The hearing went live. The banner read, House Budget Review, Medicaid, SNAP, and federal welfare programs. But for millions watching at home, particularly those living with financial uncertainty, the topic meant something far more personal. Survival. Jasmine Crockett, dressed in a charcoal blazer and silver earrings that caught the studio lights, sat upright behind a stack of labeled folders. Each one marked by topic: housing shortages, food insecurity, Medicaid reductions, letters from constituents. She came equipped with evidence and testimony, not to plead a case, but to challenge policy directly. Opposite her sat Speaker Mike Johnson, the architect of what he called, one big, beautiful bill. The name sounded harmless, almost patriotic, until you read its content. It would cut subsidies, reduce food stamp eligibility, and dismantle Medicaid expansion. Johnson leaned back, fingers interlocked, maintaining the composed look of someone confident in his position, like a strategist watching an opponent make the first move. But Crockett was no novice. She leaned closer to her microphone, speaking with controlled precision. This bill, she said, isn't just misguided. It's harmful, targeted at those already struggling. The only thing appealing about it is the font on the cover page. The chamber fell completely silent. No coughs, no shifting papers, just the faint clicking of cameras and a noticeable tension moving through the room. Johnson remained quiet for a moment. He lifted his water bottle, taking a slow, deliberate sip, as if controlling the tempo of the conversation. Without looking toward Crockett, he spoke into his microphone with calm detachment. Congresswoman, he said, next time consider preparing with a calculator rather than a megaphone. Budget analysis isn't built on emotional anecdotes. It wasn't only the statement. It was the tone. A dismissive coolness that seemed intentional. Crockett did not react outwardly. Her focus remained forward, though her fingertips pressed slightly into a handwritten letter from a single mother in Shreveport. Across the room, discomfort spread quietly. Johnson hadn't simply disagreed. He had dismissed real hardship as background noise. Then the silence broke. A voice from the left side of the chamber rose evenly. Representative Linda Martinez stood, her expression firm but composed. Mr. Speaker, that comment was beneath the dignity of this institution. But Johnson cut her off sharply. I did not recognize the gentlewoman from California, he said, his tone suddenly formal and rigid. And I did not request commentary. The atmosphere shifted. The temperature in the room felt colder. Crockett stayed still, but something fundamental had changed. The divide was no longer just about policy. It was about who held the power to speak, and who was expected to remain quiet. In that moment, the veneer of order cracked under pressure. The room, once a controlled space of political strategy, now felt like the center of a growing storm. But Jasmine Crockett did not react to Mike Johnson's remark. She didn't need to react. Her silence carried more weight than anger. It was the silence of someone who expected hostility, and was now calmly preparing to show the evidence. She reached for the crimson folder labeled Medicaid Impact, Louisiana, with the precision of someone focused on facts, not theatrics. Facts demanded by communities affected when policy prioritizes profit over people. Cameras locked in. Even those who initially dismissed her leaned forward. She removed one sheet from the folder, held it between two fingers like a formal finding, and spoke with a steady, measured tone. According to the Kaiser Family Foundation, she began, her voice clear and direct, if this bill passes, 190,000 people in your state, Mr. Johnson, will lose Medicaid coverage. The number was more than a statistic. It represented families, histories, real circumstances. That includes children with asthma, individuals managing diabetes, veterans, working parents, and elderly residents in wheelchairs, she continued. These aren't theories. These are your constituents, your neighbors. After a deliberate pause, she added, they'll lose healthcare not because they failed the system, but because the system stopped pretending to support them. Silence followed, but not the routine kind. It was the silence that settles after a difficult truth is stated, one that cannot be ignored. The tension could be felt across every seat in the room. Mike Johnson remained unchanged in posture, sitting back with the calm of someone certain he could not be challenged. He didn't look at notes or acknowledge staff. Instead, he offered what the room seemed unprepared for. A smirk, a brief scoff, and a comment that would dominate coverage for the next 3 days. Louisiana doesn't need welfare addicts, he said. We don't need people who think the government owes them a living. Louisiana doesn't need freeloaders. The words, delivered casually, landed heavily. The reaction was immediate. Pens stopped. A quiet exclamation came from the press gallery. But Crockett didn't move. She wasn't shocked or shaken. Her expression remained steady and analytical. She had encountered behavior like this before. Confidence masking disregard, and silence mistaken for acquiescence. Then she stood. Not abruptly, but with deliberate calm, as if signaling that she had heard enough. She aligned the page in her hand, set it down, and faced the speaker directly. Her voice was lower, shaped by experience rather than privilege. You're cutting people's legs out from under them, she said, then criticizing them for not finishing the race. You're limiting their resources, then calling them unmotivated. You're removing their support, then questioning their frustration. Each line landed with clarity. She wasn't seeking approval or applause. This wasn't performance, it was accountability. The chamber, once a space for technical policy arguments, now felt like a place of judgment. Not about a bill, but about the values behind it. Crockett wasn't arguing anymore. She was stating consequences. What followed didn't simply cross a boundary. It eliminated it entirely. As the echo of her final sentence faded, the room waited to see if Mike Johnson would reconsider or retreat. He did neither. Instead, he leaned forward, pressed his microphone button with a slow click, and delivered a remark that shifted everything from policy disagreement to personal insult. She isn't a serious person, he said. She's a TV act, fake eyelashes and outrage as her brand. The remark had no policy relevance. It was criticism aimed at identity, appearance, and credibility. The tone was dismissive, delivered with the ease of someone accustomed to speaking without consequences. The target wasn't her argument, it was her personhood, her presence, her visibility. Specifically as a black woman in a field that often expected her to remain restrained. A wave of unsettled reactions moved through the room. Aides paused, reporters exchanged glances, unsure whether to document the moment immediately or process its weight. Several women in Congress sitting behind Crockett visibly tensed. One whispered, "Unbelievable." Another closed her folder. The impact of Johnson's words wasn't only heard, it was felt. Many women in politics had faced subtle dismissals, but this was direct, open, and without hesitation. And still, Jasmine did not react outwardly. She didn't blink. Her posture remained composed, hands resting on the same page she referenced earlier. But her gaze shifted, focused, deliberate, and steady. The emotion in her eyes didn't flare. It sharpened. It became clear. The outrage faded. In its place was something steadier, colder, and far more focused than anger, resolve. Crockett wasn't embarrassed. She was activated. She looked at Johnson not as a peer, but as someone who had just triggered the biggest political fight of his career without realizing it. She didn't need to respond immediately. Not yet. Some responses don't arrive in loud exchanges. They appear in what follows. The moment could have ended in silence. It could have stopped at the point where most officials choose to mask hostility with formal language. But Mike Johnson, whether feeling bold, resentful, or simply convinced that authority protected him, chose a different path. Public humiliation. The chamber felt tense. Jasmine Crockett hadn't reacted, hadn't replied. And perhaps that quiet unsettled him more than any argument would have. Maybe her calm seemed too controlled, too confident. He leaned forward again, gripping the microphone with intention, and raised his voice. Not just dismissive now, mocking. I don't have time for an emotional speech from a woman who thinks she's Rosa Parks just because she's upset. The comment didn't land like a policy statement. It hit like debris. Audible gasps moved across the room. Aides looked up from their screens in shock. Several lawmakers pulled back in disbelief, one slamming a pen so hard it snapped. Johnson hadn't only insulted a colleague. He had used the name of a civil rights figure, symbolizing dignity and courage, and reduced it to a punchline aimed at a black woman who refused to remain quiet. It wasn't a simple insult. It was a deliberate dismissal made openly, with cameras broadcasting it from the country's highest legislative forum. His voice crackled through the sound system, and for a moment, the hearing room felt too small to contain the weight of what had just been said. Crockett's expression stayed neutral, though her chest rose slightly, slow and steady, like someone refusing to carry anger that wasn't hers. The room seemed to inhale with her. No one moved, yet everything shifted. Respect turned into frustration. Debate shifted into principle. Outside the chamber, the hearing clip circulated instantly. Within minutes, anchors discussed it with disbelief. Civil rights lawyers compared it to years of courtrooms where black women were labeled too emotional, too loud, or too visible. But inside that room, Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't need to. She allowed 6 seconds to pass, not out of uncertainty, but with intention. Like counting a beat before action, she reached into the inside pocket of her blazer. Without hurry, she pulled out her phone with the calm of someone lowering a flag on difficult ground. The action wasn't for show, it was for evidence. When power uses a microphone as a weapon, the truth needs its own record. She didn't respond. Not yet. But with her phone glowing in her hand, she made it unmistakably clear that his words wouldn't be pushed aside by procedure. They would be documented and addressed. She didn't speak after the insult. Not in the chamber, not to the media, not even online where reactions often move fastest. But Jasmine Crockett knew something Mike Johnson didn't. Some conflicts aren't won by volume. They're won by clarity. So while commentators debated and networks analyzed his remarks, she acted quietly and precisely. At exactly 9:31 a.m. the next morning, in a courthouse less than a mile from the Capitol, her legal team filed a civil lawsuit set to trigger one of the decade's biggest political disputes. The suit named Speaker Mike Johnson directly. No special protections, no political shielding, just accountability in writing and in law. The filing read like a clear challenge. The allegation: defamation carried out with deliberate intent. It stated that Johnson had knowingly and publicly engaged in character damage, racial and gender-based targeting, and personal humiliation for political effect. The evidence was the live hearing viewed by nearly 19 million Americans. His tone, his language, and his specific targeting of Crockett's identity. The lawsuit listed damages at $100 million. At $25 million for reputational harm, emotional distress, and professional damage. A $75 million in punitive damages designed to prevent similar misuse of public platforms. The message was unmistakable. This wasn't only about one insult. It was about setting a boundary for every woman spoken over, every black voice minimized, every survivor told they were too emotional for telling the truth. By noon, Washington was in turmoil. Politico called it the most significant defamation case ever filed against a sitting congressional leader. The New York Times wrote, Crockett files lawsuit that could redefine political speech limits. Even conservative outlets couldn't ignore it. Outside the courthouse, reporters fought for space, but Crockett didn't appear. No statements, no celebration. Only a sentence in the filing that carried more weight than any microphone. No title grants immunity from consequence. And with that, control of the narrative shifted. It was now her stage. And this time, the matter would be heard in court. As the lawsuit consumed the headlines, Mike Johnson responded, not with reflection, but with performance. He stepped into the Capitol press room like someone preparing for confrontation rather than accountability. Cameras flashed rapidly. Journalists crowded together, ready to record whether he would accept responsibility or reject it. He approached the podium in a navy suit, expression firm, voice sharpened before he spoke. No notes. No hesitation. Just the same cutting tone that had drawn national attention 2 days earlier. I only stated the truth, he said, steady and deliberate. We shouldn't turn political disagreements into emotional crises. The room went silent, not because his words were strong, but because they dismissed the entire situation. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a defense. It was an attempt to reframe intentional public harm as routine political debate. He didn't deny the impact. He erased it. It was dismissed, minimized, and quickly pushed aside. But outside the controlled environment of that press room, the public had already moved beyond Johnson's narrative. Within 6 hours, a viral video began spreading across every major platform, moving through digital feeds like a lit fuse. A media watchdog group compiled footage from 7 different angles. C-SPAN's direct recording, side-view cameras, satellite backups, raw live streams from reporters, and even a phone video captured from knee level. The final product wasn't just coverage. It was proof. The footage revealed Johnson's posture tightening as Crockett spoke, his hands forming fists on the desk, his expression shifting, not from disagreement, but from something harsher. And then the moment appeared clearly. The insult, the tone, the reference to Rosa Parks, delivered not as debate, but as an intentional blow. No voiceover. No commentary. The images told the full story. This was not discussion. It was dominance. By evening, the public response surged, breaking through years of unspoken frustration. The ACLU released a direct statement within hours. This is not a policy dispute. This is public misuse of authority infused with racial and gender-based contempt, broadcast nationwide. They were joined quickly. The National Coalition for Black Civic Participation labeled the incident a cultural turning point and demanded a congressional inquiry. Legal scholars wrote opinion pieces calling Johnson's defense a clear example of weaponized condescension. Even former Republican officials, now retired, appeared on television acknowledging reluctantly that there is a distinction between disagreement and degradation, and what occurred was the latter. The foundation beneath Mike Johnson wasn't merely shaking. It was giving way. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett continued to remain silent, and she didn't need to speak. The country was responding for her. As the raw footage took over major broadcasts, each frame became another piece of evidence showing power used without restraint. Inside Capitol Hill, the pressure became overwhelming. Reporters confronted lawmakers in elevators, hallways, and previously avoided spaces. Microphones appeared suddenly, questions sharp and persistent. Do you support Speaker Johnson's remarks? Is this acceptable behavior for a party leader? Many Republican members responded by avoiding the cameras. Some retreated behind staff, giving vague statements about needing more context. Others offered comments even more damaging, displays of indifference that echoed louder than silence. One senior representative brushed past a crowd of journalists, waved his hand dismissively, and said, "Crockett needs to control her emotions. This is politics, not a performance." The remark struck like a toxin. It didn't address the behavior. It critiqued the reaction to it. Not the harm, but the fact that someone dared acknowledge it. Not the insult, but the presence of a woman who refused to shrink in response. The double standard was evident. Crockett hadn't shouted, hadn't shown outburst, and hadn't broken composure. But her refusal to disappear or minimize herself, that was what unsettled them. Across the aisle, Democrats reached their limit. That evening, under the bright lighting of the Rayburn Building, House Democrats met in an emergency closed-door session. No cameras, no reporters, only urgency and determination. When they emerged, their position was unified. They would file a formal ethics complaint against Speaker Johnson, not only challenging his comments but the environment that allowed such behavior to be ignored. It was a rare action, almost without precedent in its speed. But no one hesitated. The moment demanded it. Outside the Capitol, on the marble steps that had witnessed generations of protest, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood with Cori Bush and Pramila Jayapal. Her voice steady, she reframed the moment not as shock, but as a turning point. Women were not born to remain silent when they are humiliated on national television. There were no cheers, just quiet, followed by a low wave of camera shutters capturing what would become the next day's headlines. Because with that sentence, the issue expanded. It was no longer about one woman. It was about all of them. As calls for accountability echoed through committee rooms and press conferences, attention shifted from Congress to the legal arena. The focus was no longer comments, but consequences. No longer reactions, but facts. On the morning of the trial, the steps of the U.S. District Court in Washington, D.C., looked less like a courthouse and more like a national event. Barricades lined the streets. Satellite trucks crowded the area. 11 million viewers were already watching across multiple networks and countless live streams, waiting for something few believed they would ever see. A sitting Speaker of the House defending himself in court against a black Congresswoman he had publicly insulted. This wasn't just history. It was a defining moment unfolding in real time before a nation too divided to look away. Mike Johnson arrived first, surrounded by his legal team. He walked in with the controlled posture of a practiced politician, steady, deliberate, yet burdened by the weight of public scrutiny. His wife followed one step behind, her expression fixed in a mix of loyalty and quiet strain. He didn't wave or acknowledge anyone. Cameras tracked him until the glass doors closed behind him. Minutes later, Jasmine Crockett entered through a separate entrance. She wore a sharply tailored black suit, serious and deliberate. In her hand was a thick binder. More than 200 pages of exhibits, affidavits, and timelines. She didn't look at the cameras or speak, but her presence created an immediate shift. Not because she was dramatic, but because every part of her message was clear. I came for the truth, not the performance. Inside, the courtroom held a tightly controlled tension. The judge's bench rose above the attorneys like a symbol of final authority. When the presiding judge, a woman with decades of experience and a reputation for strict discipline, took her seat, the gavel fell. It wasn't just a formality. It was a warning. Then she spoke. This is not a trial about politics. This is a trial about human dignity. Simple words, but they reshaped the entire room. The gallery went still. Even breathing felt paused. Next came jury selection. 12 citizens, 8 women, for people of color. It wasn't accidental. Not in a case like this. Their presence represented more than demographics. It reflected a deeper injury. A reminder of every voice dismissed, every woman told to quiet down, every truth overshadowed by authority. The trial hadn't yet begun, but the weight of judgment was already in the air. The quiet that followed jury selection wasn't empty. It was anticipation tightening across the room. When Congresswoman Crockett's lead attorney rose, his movement was steady and controlled, like someone aware of the gravity of the moment. No dramatics, no raised voice, only a precise request that drew every gaze. Your Honor, we request to submit into evidence a live recording from the day of the incident, captured by a concealed microphone sewn into Congresswoman Crockett's blazer. A subtle shock moved through the gallery. Even the stenographer paused. The judge nodded once. The prosecution activated the small black audio device on their table, instantly becoming the most significant object in the courtroom. The speakers crackled. Then the words landed. You're just a prop in a dress and a skin tone built for messaging. I'll have you off the stage. Off this damn stage, in 6 months. Mike Johnson's voice didn't sound like policy. It sounded like power mixed with disdain. Cold and dismissive. Not disagreement, but dominance, an effort to diminish her identity, not her argument. The room froze. No pen moved. No whisper escaped. The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. What once was private was now heard by 11 million people and 12 jurors sworn to determine the truth. One juror, mid-30s, black, eyes lined with mascara, pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. A tear slipped down her cheek. At the bench, the judge's brow tightened deeply. Her hand curled around the gavel, but she didn't use it. She didn't need to. The silence had already delivered its own judgment. Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She didn't react. She didn't look to her legal team. She just stared straight ahead, locked in, her eyes fixed on Mike Johnson. He wasn't smiling anymore. The color drained from his face, his jaw loosening just enough to reveal something he'd never shown publicly. Fear. The courtroom was still processing the impact of Johnson's recorded words when his defense team rose, attempting to reshape the moment. Their movement was quick, coordinated, and strained, like an effort to repair something already too damaged to be saved. Johnson's lead attorney, a seasoned Washington litigator known for strategic redirection, stepped forward with measured confidence that now felt noticeably thinner. Your Honor, he began, The recording lacks critical context. His tone carried the practiced neutrality often used to soften institutional wrongdoing. It captures only a brief segment of a longer highly charged exchange. He turned toward the jury, though their expressions made clear they needed no persuasion. The intended recipient of the statement is uncertain. It's unclear whether Mr. Johnson was addressing the plaintiff specifically, or expressing general frustration. Then came the expected argument, the one defense teams rely on when little else remains, his voice sharpening as he continued. The congressman's attorney continued, arguing that Johnson had been acting within a legislative setting, and that his comments were protected by legislative immunity. He delivered the point as though the Constitution could excuse any behavior, as if words spoken from a place of authority should be removed from accountability under procedural rules. But Jasmine Crockett's team had come prepared, not only legally but evidentially. Her attorney didn't hesitate. He opened a black evidence folder and spoke with steady, precise clarity. "We anticipated that argument, Your Honor." He tapped a screen. What followed was not a short clip. It was a full recording. The courtroom filled with a clear, authenticated, time-stamped 13-minute audio file. Unlike the earlier excerpt, this one showed the progression. The jury heard Johnson walking past Crockett's desk after adjournment. No cameras, no official microphones. Only his voice, quiet but certain. "You're just a prop in a dress and a skin tone made for messaging. I'll have you off this stage. Off this damn stage in 6 months." There was no podium or gavel present, no procedural shield. It was private then, and public now. The timestamp showed 4:42 p.m., 6 minutes after the committee hearing ended. He wasn't speaking as a legislator. He was speaking as someone who believed the moment would remain unseen. Then came the next piece of evidence. The attorney displayed an internal email dated 1 week before the incident, sent by Johnson's senior communications aide. Subject: Strategy to undermine Jasmine Crockett. Target emotion and public image. The email was explicit. Bullet points outlined methods to weaken her presence on camera, highlight her passion as unstable. One line instructed staff to use phrases like theatrics, emotional, and unprofessional. Make her optics the story. This wasn't carelessness. It was coordinated. A strategy aimed not at her policies, but her identity. No one raised their voice. The document spoke for itself. This wasn't a single insult. It was a planned effort. Calculated, political, and now fully visible. The courtroom atmosphere shifted. It felt heavier, more restrained, as if accountability itself had taken form in the air. After the recording and internal email were introduced, the room became still, focused, waiting. The judge signaled for cross-examination. Crockett's lead attorney stood, calmly and deliberately, with the control of someone who had waited a long time for this exact opportunity. He adjusted his jacket, stepped forward, and looked directly at Johnson. Johnson sat as if prepared to defend himself, but the tension in his jaw gave him away. His clasped hands were tight enough to drain the color from his knuckles. The attorney began in a low, firm tone. "Mr. Johnson, did you ever refer to Congresswoman Crockett as a dangerous media archetype during internal discussions?" Johnson hesitated, looking briefly toward his legal team. With no direction given, he answered, "I don't recall the exact wording." His voice was controlled but uncertain. The attorney didn't pause. He held up a transcript. "Let me help. This memo, dated March 7th at 11:14 a.m., from your senior communications director, quotes you calling her a dangerous archetype the media loves. Loud, defiant, photogenic. Do you deny saying that?" Johnson exhaled and shook his head slightly. "If I said that, it wasn't meant personally. It was media analysis." The attorney blinked once, steady. "Let's be more direct." He stepped closer. The gallery, filled with reporters, aides, and spectators, felt tense. "Did you or did you not say, 'Get her off camera as quickly as possible'?" Johnson's expression tightened. He shifted again. "That might be out of context. It wasn't about her personally. It was about segment timing. Optics, maybe." "Optics," the attorney repeated slowly. "So you don't deny the statement. You're adjusting the interpretation." A faint shift moved through the jury box. One juror crossed her arms. Another tilted her head. Doubtful. Johnson swallowed. The authority he once held in political spaces didn't carry the same weight here. The attorney continued. Just to clarify for the court, Mr. Johnson, when you said the media should be protected from Congresswoman Crockett, was that because of her policies or her presence? Johnson blinked. That's not what I meant, he said quickly. I don't think criticizing someone for being overly emotional qualifies as defamation. The statement fell flat. Wrong moment, wrong tone. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply clear. There was no ambiguity left. His attempt to reduce the issue to emotions instead of actions had the effect of confirming what had already been shown. He was framing her response as exaggerated, her pain as political, her reaction as performance. Before the attorney could continue, the judge spoke. Her posture shifted only slightly, but her eyes were fixed on Johnson with complete focus. This court is not here to judge emotion, she said, her voice controlled and final. We are here to judge consequences. The room didn't move. Nothing more needed to be explained. Emotion wasn't on trial. Impact was. What mattered were the effects of actions taken from a position of power, especially when assumed to be without consequence. Johnson said nothing further. The tension in the room was no longer his to manage. The authority he once held in Congress, where microphones could be silenced and procedures controlled, did not apply here. This was a courtroom, not the House floor. And here, no one mistook hostility for strength, or dismissal for leadership. What began as a single recording had become a full record. What began as a dismissal was now approaching a legal judgment. The judge's words, "We are here to judge consequences," lingered as the court recessed for deliberations. For 3 days, Washington waited. The news cycle didn't just follow the trial. It centered on it. Every headline, panel, and article pointed toward the same question. Would the courts do what Congress had avoided, hold a powerful official responsible for the impact of his words? Outside the courthouse, cameras stayed fixed as reporters speculated in measured tones. Inside, 12 jurors carried a national moment. 8 women, for people of color, all committed to assessing not only the evidence but the intent behind it. In the gallery, there was no excitement. Only focus. Jasmine Crockett returned each day in silence, dressed in black not as mourning, but as clarity. Nothing about her posture or presence was performative. It was steady, direct, intentional. She rarely spoke to her attorneys and didn't acknowledge cameras. Her gaze stayed forward, not vengeful, but patient. It reflected years of similar rooms, similar comments, similar dismissals labeled as policy disagreements. But this time, the process did not overlook her. The door remained open. On the 3rd day, just before noon, the bailiff entered with a nod. The jury had reached a verdict. The announcement moved through the room like a tightening line. Everyone sat, aware of the moment. Johnson sat at the defense table, pale, his expression unreadable. He no longer resembled the man who once spoke without restraint. His wife sat beside him, her hands interlocked, her tension unmistakable. The jury entered quietly, their faces serious. No glances, no visible relief, just responsibility. When the clerk rose to read the verdict, the room fell fully silent. She unfolded the paper with measured care. In the matter of Crockett versus Johnson, she began, voice steady. We, the jury, find the defendant, Michael D. Johnson, liable for personal defamation of a severe and malicious nature. A deep, quiet stillness filled the room. Then she continued, motivated by political intent and underlying bias. There was no loud reaction. Only a shared exhale, surprised, restrained, collective. It wasn't just a legal win. It was confirmation. It established that Crockett's response had not been exaggerated, her experience not imagined, her presence not a performance. She had not been too emotional. She had been correct.